I'm now going to invite my colleague Craig Copeland to share some really interesting research on required minimum distributions. I think it's some novel new research that we're debuting here. So welcome, Craig.
I can see after waiting 55 years to do my Kennedy Center debut, I get it back in another year, so that's impressive. But we're today, as Barb mentioned, we're going to talk about RMD effect on policyholders of turning assets into income. And one of the big things that we talked about this morning is decumulation. What are the decumulation strategies going to be there? Well, it looks like this policy of the RMD seems to be driving a lot of decisions, particularly for IRA holders at that age. This has been a discussion we've had many members. Drew Carrington and I have had that discussion many times. And it's about 2 years after he really wanted the research, but it's here, so we're going to talk about it. The reason that we're going to be focusing on 2019, 2020, and 2021 is those were very important years, because 2019 was the last year when the age was 70 and a half. 20 was supposed to move to 72, but then it ended up being suspended because of COVID legislation. So 2021 was the first year that the RMD age moved from 70 and a half to 72 in a fully effective thing. And we want to see is what that impact was on people's decisions to make those distributions. How impactful was that? So we're going to start going through those years. We're going to look at some of the, I'm going to give you some more background on the data and go through and see that. And then at the end, we're going to do something, well, is there anything happening in Roth distributions because of this? And then at the very end, we do have this discussion that we're going to have a discussion at the tabletop about what this means for retirement strategies and what we should be thinking about for decumulation in time. So first of all, let's give a quick background on RMDs. So in 2019, as I said, was the last year that people had to start taking in distributions in the year that they turned 70 and a half. They could actually take them the year after that. They had until April 1st of the next year in the year that they turned 70 and a half. So that was the first year. In 2020, that year moved, that age that people had to start was in 72. If you had already started, though, you still had to continue distribution, so that was a new group. And then in 2021 was the first year that it was fully effect for 72 up. And they also not only tell you the age, there is the formula then that tells you how much you have to take out. So depending upon your age, there is a life expectancy factor that is published by IRS. So you take your balance at the end of the year, prior year, divide it by that factor, and that is how much you have to take out during that year. But one thing that's interesting about this is that you have to calculate it for each individual account that you have, but you do not have to take it out of each of the individual accounts. If you have more than one, you could take the total amount out of one of the accounts, not out of each of it. So you could preserve one account as long as you're taking the total amount that you need to take out and just take it out of one of the 2 or 3 accounts that you may own. So, and you can see there has been some changes since then. I'm not going to be talking about those, but I just want to inform you in 2022, the longevity, the life expectancy factors were increased, so the amount you had to take out was decreased. 2023, the age moved up to 73, and Secure 2.0 has that going up to 75 in 2033. So there is a lot of action going on in here, and it'd be really important to know what is this? Does this matter to people's decisions and what we go to? So the data we're going to use is the EBRI IRA database. I'm going to be looking at over 3 million individual retirement accounts from various record keepers. So this is actual participant level data, so we can see what they're doing with their data. And they're going to have it for 2019 through 2021. It was important to only focus on accounts that we could follow. So if someone had an account and then depleted the entire thing, that was not what we felt was a retirement strategy, so we're not including those people. So they had to maintain the account so we could actually see what type of or strategy they're taking or how much they're preserving, so we could understand what that type of turning these assets into income strategy these people were using from the IRAs. In this, we had the information on whether it was A traditional, a Roth. We have this category that we asked for when we provide this data was a rollover, so that money was not originally started in that particular record keeper. The money came from someplace else. Overwhelmingly, bulk of this money is then from employer plans. There could be a few rollover to IRA, rollover to rollover IRAs. So those are the same, but the bulk of that is from the employer plans, and they are traditional plans. There are a little bit, a growing amount of rollovers now, are Rothification, but for most of those that are in their upper 70s, it was going to be all traditional. So I'm including those in the analysis. Obviously, the separate analysis for Roth because of the different rules. And we'll have the end-of-year balance, the total distribution amount taken during the year, and then we know the age and the gender of the participant. So I'm going to do some quick stats on comparing those. So for first, the incidence of distributions, just the percentage of people that took out a distribution in a given year by age is the first thing we're going to look at. And one thing that you could see is that really until you get to those RMD ages, you do not have a lot of people taking out distributions. You have about a third of the people, 30%, 25%, particularly when you get to 62 to 69 age, when you think most people would be retired and needing to change that money. Changing that assets into money, they're not really doing it until they're then required to. You can see the jump up at 70, and again, because of the weird 70 and a half, if your half birthday wasn't in that year, you didn't have to take it out, even though you'd be 70, on your on the date, because we had the date at your age at the end of the year. You may not have reached the 70 and a half, so you don't really see the jump up till 71 where you get to 85. And again, we have a few of these people had Roth IRAs, few of these people could have taken their IRA from some of the IRAs that we do not have. They may have had it in someplace else. So you would probably all expect, oh, this should be 100%. No, it's about 90% based upon the kind of the issues that they can have with taking out distributions from just one IRA instead of every IRA. So that is for what happened 2019 when we had the 70 and a half. I'm going to skip 2020 and go to 2021. And there is where we had the differences in the ages, because these are the year that's fully in effect. And you could see the tremendous difference in that 70 age and 71 age, and really see then that now in 2021, that jump up doesn't happen until they're age 72. And then you get the people being up at the 85, 87% for taking out the contributions. Whereas before you had to jump up at 70 and a half and 71. Again, that change really changed how many people started taking out at that age. It's really a key factor. Now, I'm going to go to 2020 when we had the suspension of benefits. So the 2020 is now in the middle between those two. I'm only focusing in on the 69 to 73 plus here. And again, we see that number drops down and then jumps back up for that. We do have a number of people that still took out their distribution in those ages. But one of the things, like my mother, for example, the suspension didn't happen until midway through the year. She had already taken her distribution out at the beginning of the year, and then she was going to put it back in at that point. So we do that. But we do see that people responsive to that suspension of benefits, that we're down at just over 50% of those people that would have been required if they hadn't spent the benefit. Instead of we're up over 80 to 90% of the people that took a distribution when though we're fully in effect. So there is clearly that impact on that age and those rules on people taking that distributions, and it doesn't really happen until they do get to that age. Now, want to look at, well, is there a difference by account balance? Are people with higher account balances more responsive to these changes, or are they less responsive? And really, if you look at it, there's really the same type of responses across all of the balance groups, how much they have in there. You see there is a little bit more likelihood of taking a distribution when they had a higher amount, but really the same type of responses you see in those different groups of balances they have, whether it's really low or up over those that have over $250,000 in the balance. And this was the end of year 2019 balance. The next thing is by gender, it's really remarkable. I guess it's not really that surprising because gender really isn't going to have that kind of the age impact that, but the percentages almost are identical between the male and females, so that was not really a big choice difference in those that took distributions. Now, the other big issue is the longitudinal results, is because I were actually able to follow these 60 people. Those were just, each year how people happen. But now I'm going to be based upon this off of the people that took a distribution in 2019. So they either started taking their distributions in 2019 or they were continuing. What percentage of them stopped taking it in 2020, and what percentage of them took them in 2020 and 2021? So at the bottom, the blue is those that took it in both 20 and 21, and you see those that stopped taking it in 20 and then came back in 21 as they were soon required again. And you can see that it's really age invariant of those that had already started taking the contributions. It was around 59 to 60% that continued to take their distributions, but we had that 30 to 35, we had that 35 to 37% that stopped taking their contribution in 2020. So you did see that a good over a third of the people that had already started taking distributions, that they were continuing to take that money. So again, there is a little bit difference when we looked at by plan account balance. It did more likely to continue to take the distributions. We saw that the blue, the bottom, the taking distributions in both years went up from a little over 50% up to about 64%. But we do have about that 33 to 40% that remained, or those that actually stopped taking the distributions in 2020 when they weren't required in that year. So there was that good 33%, third of people that stopped taking their distributions when they could. Now, amounts. So not only were people more likely to take contributions because they were required to, but the other thing is those that started taking distributions or took distributions before they were required to actually took out more. They had a higher rate of distribution. And how this was calculated since 2019, I didn't have their prior year. I took what the balance was at the end of the year, added the distribution for the denominator, and the numerator, I took what the distribution was to get the rate. So I could do these the same way. And you could see that the distribution rates were higher for people that took them out before they were required to. Once they were in the ages that they were required to, the average distributions went down. You could see that it was more at the 5%. When they were just taking it out, we're at the 9 to 10% range for those that took it out for that. So not only does it impact when you take it out, it looks like it's impacting how much you take it out, because you have that very specific formula under the RMD requirements that tells you how much they should be taking out. So again, that's not only the when to take it out, but how much is also part of that regulations and the default. This other really thing that I found interesting was the percentage of people that took a distribution that was larger than what was required. And so we saw in 2020, those that took it out, about 51% of people took a distribution out that was larger than what was required or would have been required if they had to have in 2020. I broke 2021 into 2021 and 2021B. 2021 is just those people that did not stop taking their contribution in 2020. So those were the people that continued to take it both years. The likelihood of those people being higher than their RMD was, up at 40%. But those that stopped taking in 2020 and then started again in 2021, only about 15 to 20% took more than their RMD. So you see that group of people is very, very responsive to the RMD rules. They knew that they could stop, and they were following the amount that they were required to take the distribution. Whereas those that continued to take the distribution were more on autopilot and weren't as diligent with what they could exactly take out. So again, that was a very important part of what's going on, is how that played out in their decision to take out and what they took out. So one last thing I just quickly go through here. Roth distributions did not seem to be really impacted either by age or what was going on. Not surprisingly, you don't have to take them out, but it was still pretty consistent. That was about 8 to 10% regardless of the year and the age of people that took a Roth distribution in any particular year. So that was one thing that not really much was going on there. So really, what does that come to? That comes to is that the RMD rules clearly are a default strategy for many people in what they take out of their IRAs. The impact of these rules is significant, and how we define these can have a really big impact on what people's decisions are, and they're taking their RMDs. The distribution rate is smaller, so not only taking it out, but how much they take out is also impacted by the RMD rules. They're more likely to take out what's prescribed instead of something that may be on a more ad hoc basis. We don't see a lot of differences by account balances and gender, and the Roth distributions did not seem to be impacted. So that's kind of the quick run through of a study that will eventually come out of really kind of showing the impact of how these RMDs is one way that people are making their decisions to withdraw assets and making it into income. So at the last half of my presentation, we're supposed to have a table talk discussion, or if anyone wants to, comment on when I put these questions up here in a second, please do. But the first two, I just kind of want to see for like a show of hands. Did anyone really expect these results, or was this surprised that the impact would be so strong? So if anyone was surprised, let me see it. Show of hands. Anyone? No one was surprised? Everyone expected this? Okay. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad I reaffirmed your beliefs that this was happening. But that's good, because I think now that we understand that, we can consider doing that. Now, the second question was, do plans have a role to play in the distribution withdrawal strategy? I know I was using IRAs for this, but again, a lot of this money is coming from employer plans into IRAs. So do we think plans have a role to help define these strategies and to help define what's going on? I'll take a show of hands on here if we do think that employer plans should be. All right, so we do have that. So now this is the one that is not going to be easily to do a quick polling on, is what role should that be? I know there is a great deal of discussion of how that should be, and not only was what the role should be, then what products or strategies should the employers be making available or designing within their plans for these withdrawal strategies. This, certainly if anyone would like to come up and want to talk around your table, or if there's some people that have some ideas on what they think of, I really welcome any discussion here in our last amounts. Don't hesitate. Use that 10 minutes before we go to lunch and talk that. So, Laura.
On the year where people were able to stop taking
Right.
medications, do you have any data about whether those people were getting advice from somebody?
We do not.
That was really
Right, and I know, and because those were the same people that took out exactly the amount that they had. I'm sorry. It was asked whether we knew they had financial advice for those that did not take a distribution in 2020, whether they were working with a financial advisor or received advice otherwise to know not to take it out. And that would be very important if we knew that, but unfortunately we did not have data. I think Drew deserves to have the question.
There we go. This is awesome. I'm super excited to see this data. My question is, so now we can see what's going on with respect to distributions in IRAs. But I also have a question. Do we see similar sorts of catalyst activity around people maybe taking rollovers from their qualified plan assets so that they can sort of deal with all the RMDs in an IRA? So is that a trigger, and did the trigger age change from 70 and a half to 73 as the RMD rules changed?
Now you got my next study defined for me. No, I do not have that yet. But one thing we did notice, we did see more before 65, before this changed. I have not been able to look at the data post 2019 to see if there's some difference in that rollover time occurring because of that age. But you're always good with defining new studies, so that will be our next project going forward. Since you have the microphone in the back, I'll go there and then we'll get to you.
So I'm curious about the talk of the possibility of having safe harbors and defaults for distribution options outside of the employer plans.
Do you mean in an IRA or?
No, in an employer plan. So you were talking about the employer side of things. So
Right.
and I think the behavior is exactly the same, as long as it's traditional assets. So if we're trying to help people spend their money and have a good retirement, there's obviously a tremendous threat to this by the RMD continually being pushed out and with the adjustment to the mortality table. So we need people to spend their money. And if they're just going to rely on RMDs, then a lot of them are, we're telling them sort of that it's a safe way of doing it, right? It's become the default. So how do we change policy to encourage plan sponsors to play a different role, to offer different options that aren't just take the RMD?
And you're suggesting that there should be safe harbor design so that obviously there's not litigation.
Correct.
That we know, and to provide the potential innovation designed within the legislation or regulation to preserve. Yeah, I think that's really what you have to ultimately do. But what those are, I still think we don't know what those ideas are yet.
I have a paper.
You have a paper? I shouldn't say we don't have the ideas. I don't think that everyone has come to an agreement on what the correct idea is or the best ideas are. Oh, you have a mic. Okay.
Okay, so I want to go back to the plan. So because more people, I think, are keeping money in the plan as opposed to moving it to the IRA because of fees and other. So are you doing something on the plan side? Because I think that will have a role in what the plan sponsor should have in that. Because I think once the money leaves the plan, I don't think because of litigation risk that a lot of plan sponsors are going to want to be involved in designing strategies or helping employees. So I'm curious more on if you're going to do something on the plan side, or have you, and then what?
I haven't, but I have to believe since there is that same RMD that the money that is in there, you're going to see some of the same, you're going to have to see some of the same issues because people are going to have to start taking it out at those ages, and they're going to take out what's required. So. Right. I did not expect them to take it at all during the IRA. It was if they still in the plan, and are they rolling it out, or are they taking their distributions within the plan, and how can the plan, when it stays in the plan, help them make those decisions to withdraw the plan? And she pointed out that really we probably shouldn't want people waiting until 75 to take their money out. If they have plenty of money, they should be able to spend that money. They should be able to using it across their entire lifetime. And there has to be better strategies of taking that assets to be income and what those are. I know there's going to be a discussion later about some of those products. Here I'm just throwing it out ideas into a broader discussion of what could be there. And I'll give you a chance.
So I think just anecdotally, you hear these stories, and we're seeing it on the street, where people are so adverse to paying tax. So you have a scenario where the majority of these people have pre-tax only money, and every dollar they take out, 30 cents, has got to go back to the IRS. So people are actually living, as you had mentioned, poorer than they had planned to because of this aversion. So I think this whole scenario fixes itself, hopefully in the future, with Roth contributions. People can say, well, it's tax-free, so I can live the way I planned.
Right, and there is an interesting issue with Medicare premiums. If you wait too long and take larger sum distributions, you could actually be hit with more taxes later through having to pay premiums on your Medicare. So there is a reason to might probably take it out earlier, particularly for those with large balances, to really put that over a longer time so you don't have to pay for the Medicare premiums. So there is a whole bunch of issues going there. But the Roth problem, the Roth has twofold. You have more flexibility in taking out, and when you do take it out, it doesn't count as income potentially to pay for Medicare premiums as well. So there is a lot of issues in it, and you see more and more discussion about people potentially doing conversions to Roth, sometime in their 60s, maybe before they hit the RMD age, so they can avoid some of those issues.
Quick question. So just going back to your finding of where you see that there are higher distributions before the RMD age relative to after. Do you find any differences in demographic characteristics between those groups? Because I'm thinking if it's people with higher balances who are able to wait longer and higher and longer job tenures, who are able to wait till they reach the RMD age before they start to take their distributions, as opposed to those who may have lower account balances and shorter job tenures.
I wish I had their other income, because I know that would be a huge factor, because they may not need to. I can only go off balances, and balances, people still took out higher rates when they started taking distributions before the RMD, regardless of the balance size.
So I have a quick question. High level, what is your interpretation of these results? So this mass that's occurring at the RMD age, this of increased liquidity, there's been a bunch of scholarship in the last few years that suggests it's not all going to consumption. There are increases in charitable giving that occur around this age. There are increases in non-qualified savings as well that muddy the waters about when it comes to whether or not this is all, you can interpret all of this as foregone consumption that otherwise would have been welfare enhancing pre-RMD age. And one thing you could do would be to look at individuals that also have a Roth to see whether or not the option of using liquid Roth savings as a buffer is offsetting, meaning are individuals rationally tilting to this responsiveness if they do or do not have the Roth component as well?
I did do a little bit of people that had both a Roth and a traditional contribution, and there wasn't anything clear that they were making that trade-off. And yeah, I do want to, it's a good point to qualify that. Just because they took the money out doesn't mean they're spending it. So maybe even though those people suddenly started taking it out, they may not be spending more, they just took it out because they have to. So there is that issue, and we don't know really, those took it out may have been doing something else with their money as well. It's just really kind of how that money is coming out of there, and it's a good indicator that there has to be some fraction that it is impacting their spending. And we need to do more work. I mean, I know there's been work, there'd be more work of really finding out what is going on at those particular ages and how that is changing into spending. And I think that goes back to what plans can do when the money is still there and how they can help these decisions and change that into spending. And, I haven't said particular thing, but one thing that we do see from like our spending and retirement surveys, those with guaranteed income, even that are more likely to spend when they have comparable income. So therefore, that may be another issue of thinking about whether this money can be turned into a guaranteed income source. So I appreciate the discussion because we have now hit our time, and I don't want to take any time away from anyone's lunch. So thank you very much.
With Cheryl Evans presenting her research. She's director of the Lifetime Financial Security Program at the Milken Institute. So we'll be talking about next steps and moving forward with in-plan in-plan guaranteed lifetime.
Good afternoon, and thank you. So I'm here to preview a paper that we're going to be releasing on April 2nd. It's actually, we call it a policy brief, Enhancing Retirement Income, Advancing Lifetime Income for All. So you already know that I work for the Milken Institute, and for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, our work really falls into three primary categories, which we call pillars: health, finance, and philanthropy. And the Milken Institute, of course, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan global think tank with offices here in Washington, Santa Monica, New York, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Miami, and London. So I work on the finance team, and I've been leading this program for the last 3 years. And we gather information about financial security and retirement and things related to being financially secure. So we focus on innovative programs, products that encourage or facilitate long-term savings and things that strive, I should say, to help to understand new products, new solutions, things that are out there. So over the past year, we've been convening many of you in this room, and thank you so much, to discuss in-plan lifetime income. Where are we going with it? what can we do to improve the uptake, which is the basic premise of our gatherings, and sort of understanding it. So many of you today, again, have helped us, joined us in New York for a full-day symposium. So thank you for your time, your thought, leadership, and then for our policy dinner in Washington. And, you know, we noted as we began looking at this that we're seeing these programs are proliferating. We're seeing announcements in the last year or two of even further programs. I know Power has a new one, for example. And so we gathered with many of you, and we also conducted our own research. And we want to also particularly thank Nationwide Financial, their retirement solutions business, Eric Stevenson, Amelia Dunlap, Kathy Marasco in particular, for helping guide us, think about the issues, frame them. So that was helpful. You know, today we're releasing our paper related to Invest America, investment accounts, which Mike Pirovar will be discussing, and then April 2nd we're releasing this, which we call a policy brief. I was sort of going through everything we wrote, and I'm trying to condense it down because most everyone in this room understands the issues, but I'm going to say a little more that may be slightly redundant because you work in the space, but for the media. But so our paper does the following. It provides an overview of in-plan lifetime income products, what they are for readers who don't know, who don't work in the space necessarily. We highlight the need for lifetime income, you know, why there is that need, and that's largely due to the, you know, decreased pensions that we see throughout the U.S. We discuss the interest in the products and the solutions. I think we're going to mostly call them solutions, but they're really kind of both. And we're considering what to do next to increase the availability, as I mentioned. So we present and analyze 3 categories of changes that will highlight that we think could be helpful in this space. And one thing that I noted in these gatherings, that there was a lot of consensus, a lot of I don't want to say bipartisanship because it's not a political issue, but a lot of firms came together in a way that was very impressive, wanting to discuss this, firms that could be ostensibly competitors. So that was really enjoyable to have diverse thought leadership in the room and discussing this really important issue that we think will enhance retirement savings and financial stability of all Americans. So that was really encouraging to see. The other thing that I personally noted was that the people who work in the retirement space tend to stay there for years, tend to believe in it, tend to buy into it, tend to care about it. And that enthusiasm is sort of contagious. You know, we've been doing this work for 3 years, but it's nice to see so many people who really care about what happens to Americans in their retirement. So that was a cool aspect of this as well. We knew it, but you know, just seeing it in person was another thing. So it's clear there's no one size. Sorry about my voice, it's allergies. Don't worry, I'm not going to cough on you and make you sick. Fits all structures for plan participants, but as retirement experts know, the solutions are notable. The in-plan income, you know, lifetime income solutions for their flexibility, diverse structures, allowing plan participants who are retirees to keep some funds in the accumulated nest egg, usually in most plans, while creating a stream of income with a portion of the assets. So they have different alternatives. We felt like and noted in our research that people are receptive to that idea, to be able to do both. So we gathered information about the nature of the products, the urgent need for lifetime income. That's the case that I probably don't need to make for all of you, but for those who aren't involved, you know, I already highlighted the fact that we're living longer, we have an aging population, and we have less lifetime streams of income. And we had some data that we pulled on pensions, which we've all knew, you know, back in 1980, I think there was a much higher number of people who had pensions, maybe 50+%. It's down to about 15% now. And of course, the urgency is also tied to the number of workers turning 65. We've all heard 2024 being peak 65, about 11,200, depends on the stats. Between now, if 2024 and 2027 are turning 65. And also it's a universal issue. You know, retirement is a universal concern. It affects all people of all ages, and just saving for the future. I still don't fully believe in maybe 20 years that many people are going to retire in the traditional sense. So that leaves the industry probably to think about what does retirement look like? How do we serve people in a different way, which I think is going to be an issue. And of course, Social Security we don't want that to be people's main source of income, and we're seeing that at times, and particularly not their main source of lifetime income, but even worse, their main source of income at all, which is very upsetting to see. We've seen things on the national news featuring people who are trying to live on very small amounts of money and trying to go back to work at like 85. So right now, the average benefit in 2025 is $1,976 a month. That's clearly not enough. So, we focused on those type of things, making the case. Our basic conclusion is what you would think, that offering these in-plan lifetime income options is really an innovative product that we think more people should be taking up and can be helpful. There's been a lot of advocacy, as we've talked about here and in other places, around plan access, which is really a key issue. I think about 50% have access to an employee-sponsored plan, and also increasing contributions through auto escalation, defaults, behavioral finance issues. And so we started thinking about what does lifetime income solve for. In our estimation, it solves for what many of you have written about, the longevity risk, outliving your money. I think probably most of you know that that's most retirees' biggest fear. And next, I guess, maybe behind public speaking, I don't know, but some people are more afraid of that than death, and public speaking and death, I don't know where they line up, but outliving your money or public speaking, I think many people would rather outlive their money. I can't tell, but we hear a lot about the fear of speaking. But and then also solving for the retirement consumption puzzle, it's hard to say that, which many of you have written about, which is, the notion that retirees are sometimes reluctant to spend the money. So you have the fear of outliving your money, but then people are afraid to spend it to live the life that they want, which I think was alluded to by Brian. What does happiness look like? What does your life look like? And, it solves for that as well. And a number of firms here have done research highlighting the fact that people are more likely to spend down in a way, hopefully, that's reasonable, their guaranteed income than they are their sort of pot of money or accumulated savings. They just feel more comfortable doing that. So it solves for those two things, which we thought was interesting as well. So we dug into research by Greenwald and Associates and others, gathering data on just sort of what's out there, what are people interested in the product, what's the interest level, what are plan sponsors saying about the uptake, and that's kind of where we landed in our analysis. There's there'll be stats in the paper regarding a finding that 60% of workers, through one of Greenwald's, actually their most recent research, found that lifetime income was highly desirable. And there's a discussion, there's a number of discussions on those kind of data points. And then we do see a mismatch between the expressed interest and the need for the solutions on one hand, the number of plan sponsors who are offering them on the other. The same Greenwald survey that came out in 2025, but it was based on 2024 data, noted that only 25% of plan sponsors currently have one or more lifetime income solutions, while 30% are seriously considering. That's good, but we really recognize and saw after talking with people that these products can be really helpful and a game changer. We thought about what are the primary reasons for the mismatch, and there's reporting that differs slightly on it, but some of the things are people wanting, plan sponsors, companies wanting straightforward explanations of the solutions, transparent fee structures, and some of that is out there, and a better understanding of the solutions themselves. Many are wary of the reputation. They may view them as annuities, and then limitations on the retail annuities products. Sometimes they're conflated, and then the vulnerability to litigation or other issues under ERISA is a huge issue, and I hadn't thought about it. I'm a securities lawyer, and I'm quite familiar with securities class actions, but I know that their ERISA bar has been pretty aggressive when there's a change in the plan. So with our experts and doing some research, we considered what are things we can do to sort of change the environment to encourage uptake of the products, and talking to some plan sponsors. The first is promoting an asset class definition, which is an interesting solution that we came up with actually at our last dinner in October. So for us, what does that mean? That means calling this a new asset class. And I was saying to Mairead, who works with me, there's no universal definition of a distinct asset class. It's not like the SEC or CFTC comes down from on high and said, here's a new asset class. But by some of their actions, things become an asset class when they take action to propose rules, and also what's happening in the market. But looking at financial experts and researching economic journals, as you all probably know, categories of financial products that do certain things are deemed usually a new asset class or their own distinct asset class. And that's exhibiting similar characteristics, performance, similar performance, liquidity, and risk profiles. And then generally asset classes have behave similarly across the markets and have consistent legal structures and objectives. So we feel like these products fall into that category. And of course, when you create a new asset class, not you, but one is sort of created and discussed as such, they tend to be innovative and sort of innovation and market driven. So that's kind of a conclusion that we thought was important. So we're hoping for movement towards discussing and clarifying and regulating this as a separate investment product. So, we did things in the paper like researching major asset classes, just some historical analysis, when mutual funds involved in the 1920s, how that arose, et cetera, the rise of ETFs, options, et cetera. And this ties into sort of the fiduciary plan obligations of plan sponsors under ERISA. And that's where we get into more of a technical analysis. So I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but you'll see it in the paper. So as we know, most plan sponsors have fiduciary obligations under DOL rules, which require them to exercise, the highest duty of care. They're bound by duties of loyalty, prudence, and care. These are legal terms that I've, applied for other things in the security space. And most participants, have to put interests above their own, as we all know. So that's an issue, I think, and it makes sense to us that plan sponsors make very deliberate choices generally on their investment lineup and also can be even cautious. So we concluded that, sometimes when you're looking at these products, it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison to other investments with fundamentally different investment goals due to their unique combination of features. So we believe that putting these into their own asset class would be a more realistic comparison and be helpful. So we're hoping to gather some people and some experts to talk about that, leading researchers, and sort of focus on that. The other thing that we focus on in the piece is refining the safe harbor language. And this is where we kind of get into the weeds on things. But, we're hoping to convene some experts again and collaborate with policymakers as an ultimate conclusion to develop a more expansive and detailed safe harbor that considers varied and innovative designs and specifies how plan sponsors can satisfy their fiduciary obligations when adding lifetime income solutions. So based on the information we've gathered, it seems clear to us that a substantial number of plan sponsors have been reluctant to offer these products due to concerns over triggering fiduciary breach lawsuits. So this fear is exacerbated, by the various designs and unique attributes. So some of the things we looked at were some of the big picture. Secure 2.0 does somewhat solve for that by providing safe harbors for plan sponsors, but we feel like it's not detailed enough. It's not giving people enough security to fully get into the product. So we concluded that the current language could be sort of tightened and made more specific. And we know that there's a gray area left for plan sponsors when determining whether to add a product. So we focused on clarifying the provisions to apply across the variations in lifetime income options. That would give plan sponsors greater surety to give their participants access to the product. And then we looked at the three primary characteristics of the safe harbor, or things that people need to do. Number one is engage in an objective, thorough, and analytical search. It's hard to know what that means, really, because I can't tell, and I'm a lawyer. To identify insurers from which to purchase their retirement income contracts. So that language is not very specific. So how do you satisfy that? Consider each insurer's financial capability to satisfy its obligations under the retirement income contract, along with the contract's cost relative to the benefits. So doing cost-benefit analysis and product features, and the administrative services provided under the contract. Again, that's not really specified. And last, once selected, the plan sponsor has to conclude at the time of the selection, the insurer is financially capable of satisfying its obligations, and that the cost of the selected retirement income contract is reasonable. And so that reasonableness standard is not defined. And usually in the law, you do have some definition of a reasonableness standard. So we believe that more can be done in this space without fully getting into it to make some changes. And we have some specific recommendations. I'll just give one example. The requirement to conduct a thorough and analytical search is not defined. The provision could be made more specific by adding details outlining the meaning of an objective and thorough analytical search. So it, for example, could require employers to document how many insurers they met with or how many they considered. It could also list factors within the safe harbor to consider for the analytical search and require documentation on that analysis. Factors could include the number of potential insurers that they met with, sponsors, financial ratings of the company, lifetime income, experience in the area, whether other fiduciary regulatory oversight, and so on. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, those 3 topic areas, and then a sort of general overarching area. There's also provision related to liability guarantee, and of course, focusing on the reasonableness standard. What does that mean? It's not clear what that alone is probably not enough. So those are some of the things we're looking at, and we get into more depth in the paper, but I'm going to leave some time for us to chat. And then lastly, we looked at expanding educational outreach. So we looked at that in terms of 2 plan sponsors and 2 individuals. So we were thinking and discussing this with others, and we came to the conclusion that providing a straightforward, accessible materials that clearly explain the products to plan sponsors and plan participants would be helpful. And I know a lot of you in the room are probably thinking, well, we do provide explanation, do we need more? But we feel like maybe more is needed. So we believe that education efforts that reach out to workplace-sponsored retirement plan decision makers would be impactful, coupled with educational outreach to plan participants. So building an awareness and understanding of the solutions among decision makers we think would be important. And some things that we considered that could be done would be creating additional outreach materials and products, and discussing the fees, producing FAQs that differentiate in-plan income products from traditional annuities and other investment options, providing and highlighting key benefits, including the ease of use, flexibility, income certainty throughout retirement, other explanatory materials that outline examples of use, perhaps even glide path examples with and without the products, examples how they work during the decumulation phase. Those are some of the things that we think could be useful. Our research and meetings also indicate there's a significant number of Americans, thousands or probably perhaps millions, need more education about the importance of lifetime income and how in-plan income guarantees work. We believe that a broader public education campaign could be useful. Most plan participant employees are not proactively seeking out these products, nor do they necessarily recognize they need guaranteed income. I sort of did tests and asked people I knew, they didn't know what I was talking about, should be a part of, that should be a part of their retirement planning. And so many people don't, understand the solutions exist. Some of this work could be led by existing organizations, and we could do some work too. We even called out the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm pointing to me, focusing on general consumer awareness for lifetime income and promoting maybe a new stream of work focused on employees and employee retirement plans. So we also thought, in concluding, we're saying that we really probably need to convene policymakers. We can make up ideas, I don't say make up, but we can suggest solutions for the safe harbor, but we'd love to continue this work and convene policymakers, researchers, stakeholders, people from the government to sort of think about the asset class, particularly in the safe harbor portion. So that's kind of where we came out on it, and we felt like this piece will be one that is really to highlight the products for the general public, and then also make some suggestions for the industry, things that can be done, and then policymakers as well. So some of it's kind of basic, maybe for all of you here, but that's really just to educate people about the fact that the products exist. So we had the 3 questions, which I think we're going to pull up, the 3 questions in the back. Yeah. So, these are the things we just talked about, asset class definition, what could be done collectively as an industry to help create the guaranteed income asset class. That's a little bit of a tough one. The safe harbor, do you agree that we need more clarity and that it would make a difference in plan sponsor adoption? And education, what are some non-traditional ideas beyond marketing campaigns that would be useful? And also, for participants on guaranteed income solutions. So we just wanted to throw it out there. If anyone has any thoughts, I know a lot of you have been thinking about this. Is there something else that we're missing that you think may help with uptake? And do you feel like any of these will be useful and helpful? So happy to hear any comments or thoughts. I know, Kathy, you may have had a comment. We were chatting earlier.
So I do agree with the 3 calls to action. But I'm wondering if we could focus today, the rest of our time, on the education piece. In this room, I think we have a lot of the industry leaders in this in-plan lifetime income, and how can we come together to help educate? How do we create common terminology? How do we create common stories that we can then share and that we get the message out? So I would just like to open that up for conversation.
Yeah, we were thinking in terms of, should there be an industry coalition? Should we have a meeting and call it a coalition, you know, for in-plan lifetime income? So I don't know if people have a reaction to that, but most of the large firms have the products, so. Tamika?
Hi, I just wanted to respond to the language issue, and I think that, you know, this is one of the reasons through DECIA, we have this a lexicon project, because we have a lot of different organizations that are actually doing fantastic work, putting together different educational pieces, both for the industry and for individual participants or retail investors. But we kind of lack this consistency, and I don't, like, do we need a coalition, or do we just need all the organizations to talk to each other?
Yeah.
So that's part of the purpose of it, is not to like elevate a particular organization, but just to have the effort of coming to some sort of terms of how we talk to folks. So I don't know if that's supposed to be a question. Can we do that?
Maybe, yes.
Drew, you have something to say.
Yeah, crazy, I know. I'm going to actually steal one of Lou's lines about the safe harbor. Safe harbors are, they sound awesome, except that once you have a safe harbor, everything else is definitionally unsafe.
Yes.
And so it creates sometimes a reluctance to act at all, because then if I do something that even looks a little bit not the safe harbor, then now I've done something unsafe. And so I think, you know, setting out principles and guidance, what you were talking about, you know, adding clarity around what do these things mean, what do these words mean, that's great. But I would just say we should be careful about using the safe harbor language. Thank you, Lou, for the line.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I don't know, if you don't have a safe harbor, what do you have? And that, I'm not sure the answer of that either, right? But we see that in other areas of the law as well, when there's a safe harbor. People don't necessarily feel safe under it because the carve-out is not usually extremely specific. But if they fall out of it just slightly, then they feel like, okay, they're going to be subject to a lawsuit. And then I think that may contribute to sort of freezing, like we don't know what we're supposed to do. So I think those are the three big challenges that we came away with. We did like the asset class definition. That's almost by usage. It's like changing your name by usage. You know, I could just change my name to, I learned that when I got married. I could just call myself whatever I want. I went back and forth between names, by the way. I couldn't decide because Evans was an easy name, but to say. But yeah, that's something I think we could discuss and maybe put some statements out, et cetera. But it does seem to be a distinct asset class for the reasons I articulated, and behaves slightly differently, you know, across the markets, and behaves similarly across markets. So that could be interesting as well. But I don't know if there's anything else, but we'll be releasing the paper April 2nd and discussing it a bit more, and then maybe reaching out to some firms to think about next steps to convene, particularly policymakers, and make them aware of some of the issues, and think about what we want to do in education as well. So thank you.